Good evening, everyone. This is a real special night for us. We do Tuesday nights, but with some great guests. But tonight is very, very special for us. A person that we have tremendous respect for is joining us tonight. And of course, that is Philip Haney. Philip, good evening.
Hey, glad to be here.
Okay. Of course, Mary is with us. Mary and I get a chance to work on these projects together. Mary does all the hard work, and of course, we'll deal with your questions. If you're new to us, remember that you can enter a question anytime through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Mary will take us through those at the end of Philip's presentation. Philip is going to talk about the national security meltdown. This is really, really important. By the way, let's remember who Philip is. Philip is a guy who's taught most of us geography. Philip has talked to us about places we didn't really know existed and has connected us to places in India, the Deobandis, San Bernardino, Boston Marathon, etc. Tonight he's going to focus and take us to Iran, take us to the belligerent hostile terrorist force, the IRGC, and of course he's always talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. If these groups can work together, we are in deeper trouble than we thought. So that's why it's called a meltdown. Philip, go ahead and get us started tonight, please.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. As you can see, the title of the talk tonight is National Security Meltdown. That's been my theme for a few months now. In fact, I'm writing a sequel to See Something, Say Nothing, which is going to be called National Security Meltdown. If we were in a room right now and I asked everyone to raise their hand, I think everyone would agree that we have experienced a meltdown of national security in the last few years that really became evident during the Obama administration. And the repercussions of that are still being felt to this very day. And I will mention, even though we're not really talking specifically today about what I call saturation, in particular with the Muslim Brotherhood front groups that are operating here in the United States, I have to regretfully tell you that the level of saturation right now within our social political structure here in America, and yes, that means under President Trump, who is doing a fantastic job, but nonetheless, the harsh reality of it is that the Muslim Brotherhood is more thoroughly saturated into our social political structure right now than they ever were when I was still active duty as a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security. And maybe next time I can talk about that. And I do, yes, hope, I'm thinking ahead. You're probably wondering, well, why don't you tell people in Washington about this? Well, that's my intention, is to deploy and get back into this political arena again this year, meaning 2020, from this very day, all the way up through to the election in November, and do my best once again to advertise the nature of the threat that we face. But today, we're going to talk about Iran, the IRGC, and the Muslim Brotherhood. The IRGC just means the Iranian Republican Guard Corps. Before I even move on to the next slide, I want to mention something, in case I might forget, that for years and years now, those of us that have been in this arena have been talking about reviving the Holy Land Foundation trial, which I'm not against, don't get me wrong. But I think you'll see as we go through this that we have a new precedent that actually may be even more powerful than the Holy Land Foundation trial, which we've relied on for such a long time, actually for 12 years now, with the hope that it could be revived so that we could actually designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. We have a stronger precedent now than we did even then. And that is their direct affiliation with another globally designated terrorist group, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And guess who designated the IRGC? President Trump, last year on April 8th, 2019. So, in the good old days of law enforcement, if you had one globally designated terrorist organization and you had another group closely affiliated, then by default, we were allowed to assume that that other organization might also be involved with terrorism. But thanks to Barack Obama, he handcuffed law enforcement and made it impossible for us to develop those cases and can make those connections and those forecast those trends that might have irrefutably proven that they should have been designated. But now, with new events, I believe you'll see, keep this in mind as I go through, that we have a stronger precedent than ever for designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group. So let's go ahead on. Well, here's a person. This is clear back in 2013. So this alliance that I'm telling you about didn't just pop up overnight in the last few months. It's actually been percolating under the surface for quite a long time. And you can see that Iran's spy chief secretly advised the Muslim Brotherhood to push back against the United States. This is January 9th, almost exactly 7 years ago. And look at this paragraph that I highlighted. London reports that the head of Iran's Quds Force, General Qasem Soleimani, well, imagine that. We've been hearing a lot about Qasem Soleimani, haven't we, in the last few weeks, since January 3rd, actually, when President Trump, with some superbly accurate intelligence, did a targeted hit on Qasem Soleimani and removed a globally designated terrorist from any further action. So there you see him, clear back 7 years ago, meeting with Mohammed Morsi, who had just been elected as president of Egypt, who is the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. So again, this is not something that's been just appeared overnight. And look this paragraph down here. Mr. Soleimani, who oversees Iran's proxy militias across the region, including what? Hezbollah and Hamas. Well, there's another indicator that this narrative that Sunni and Shia groups don't work together is not correct. So let's continue forward. And you've all maybe heard of a man named Yusuf al-Qaradawi. That's him right there. He is the sheikh, the leader of the global Islamic movement, aka the Muslim Brotherhood. And he has been holding meetings for years now. This is from June of 2017, not quite 3 years ago, to find ways of reconciliation between the Sunni and the Shia branches of Islam. See right down here it says, in order to bring together Sunni, Shia, and Ibadi Muslims together. So here again, the Sheikh of the Muslim Brotherhood is acting as a liaison to bring together branches of Islam, meaning Sunni and Shia, that have been, in the most part, portrayed in the media as being separated and non-cooperative. Well, that's a false narrative, and we'll get into that more as we go forward. So now we're up to 2017. Meanwhile, back at the home front, we had a Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, that bought the hook, line, and sinker, the Muslim Brotherhood narrative, that they were the moderate alternatives to these really bad Muslim groups like ISIS or Hamas or other groups like that. And that's why people like myself ran into so much trouble when we were active duty within the Obama administration, because they were following this narrative that the Muslim Brotherhood were our friends, without, incomprehensibly, but without connecting the dots that virtually every jihadi group on the face of the earth has some kind of direct connection to the Muslim Brotherhood. So this was another false narrative, aka a national security meltdown. And this is still also 2017. And here's another slide, Rex Tillerson standing between the Muslim Brotherhood and the terrorist designation. Well, you can't just blame Rex Tillerson. Of course, he is Secretary of State, but this narrative and this approach has been promoted by the State Department for decades now. And by the way, they are the one that issue visas, not my former agency, Customs and Border Protection, but the State Department. And so even when we designated people or we targeted them and were tracking them before they came into the country, the State Department would often issue visas to no members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and we were supposedly just supposed to let them come right into the country without any opposition whatsoever. So a lot of this driving force of gravity behind the failure to recognize the nature of the threat vis-a-vis the Muslim Brotherhood came out of the middle of the State Department. And Rex Tillerson was a very faithful promoter of that narrative. Now we have also in 17, there was a lot of things going on in 2017 vis-a-vis counterterrorism and national security and border protection. And one of them was an effort to get the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a terrorist group. And this has been attempted several times. You might all remember Michelle Bachmann. She was one of the very first people within the House to attempt to get the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a terrorist group. And this one here is the Senate version. And look who is the author of this one, Senator Ted Cruz. So now here we are almost exactly 3 years later, and there has been virtually no movement forward in this effort to designate the MB in the last 3 years, let alone the last 5 or 10 or 15. This is all background information to show you why my premise about affiliation with the IRGC as a globally designated terrorist group is actually a stronger premise for the designation of the MB as a terrorist group than even the Holy Land Foundation. I'm all for bringing it back. I'm just saying we have a strong premise now. We're going to state a case. We can make the connection in this way. Here is just another sequence in the way we're fast up now to January 2019. Now we're only a year. And you're going to see that between 2013 and 2019, there were a few slides in my presentation. But going forward, between January 2019 and this year, there has been a lot of action taking place in this area. So this is Turkey. We hear a lot about Turkey also. Well, they're one of the primary supporters and promoters of the what I call saturation of the Muslim Brotherhood into every facet of a culture, political, law enforcement, education, you name it, they are there. And that's the case here in America too. So I'm just showing you that Turkey is another part of this equation. Here it says, since the overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood government of President Morsi in Egypt 2013, several TV channels affiliated with the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood have started broadcasting in Turkey. Well, of course, that goes out into the whole northern Mediterranean area. It's just another example of these deeper connections that are going to become more apparent as we move forward here. Mismatched expectations. Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood after the Arab uprising. We all remember the Arab Spring. It was called Al-Arab al-Arabiya, which is a play on words in Arabic. It doesn't mean spring quite like we think of it, unless you think of a spring season as a time of revival and renewal, because that's actually what the Arab Spring phrase means in Arabic. It's a play on words in Arabic. It says Al-Arab al-Arabiya, the resurrection of the Arab people. And that's what it was supposed to be from their perspective, and it was mischaracterized the whole time that we heard about the Arab Spring and the outreach with the Obama administration as some kind of political revival meeting, democracy, but it never was. It was always about implementation of Sharia law. And as soon as Morsi here became president of Egypt, he didn't waste any time at all beginning to implement the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And his only mistake is he moved too fast. And he outran his headlights and he crashed into the political wall of the popular uprising in Egypt, and he was arrested and removed from office. And now General Sisi, Abdul al-Sisi, is still to this day, that would be what, 7 years later, still the leader of Egypt. And here's just some more information. Now here's what I referred to earlier, April 8th, 2019. President Trump designates the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a foreign terrorist organization. That's a wonderful thing that he did. Keeping in mind, once again, that Qasem al-Soleimani was the leader of this organization. He therefore, by default, along with being designated himself as a global terrorist, being the leader of a globally designated terrorist organization, makes him by default a terrorist. So here's your background. When President Trump targeted Soleimani, he wasn't just arbitrarily targeting some administrative official in the Republic of Iran, which is how he was portrayed by and large. He was a designated global terrorist. Here again, here we are almost 2 years, about not quite a year ago. There are still efforts going on in Congress to designate the Muslim Brotherhood, but they haven't got the plane off the ground yet. So one of my hopes in showing this slide presentation and in reaching out to members of Congress is to help encourage them to recognize the fact that we don't have to just rely on the Holy Land trial as the precedent. We can also go back and see their affiliation with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And that may actually be a stronger reason to designate them. And this is just another review of the ongoing effort. Here, General al-Sisi is hoping that President Trump will finally back him up and designate the Muslim Brotherhood. But in order for any group to be designated, you have to have the State Department, you have the DOJ, you have to have the FBI, you have to have DOD some, you have to have executive branch of the government, you have to have DHS, my agency, CBP, all working, all firing on all cylinders. If one of those agencies doesn't sign off on the effort, then that will be a breach or a disconnect in the circuit, and it's very unlikely that the effort to designate any particular group will be successful. I didn't mention Congress, and I didn't mention the Department of Treasury. So you got 7 or 8 different federal government agencies that have to all be synchronized in order for one of these efforts to be successful. And that's mainly the reason why they haven't been designated yet, is because of the opposition by the State Department. But we have a new sheriff in town, as you well know, Mr. Pompeo. And I have hope that we will eventually see groups like CARE, who runs around sticking their fingers in their eyes of everything that we try to do in terms of national security and border protection, not to mention counterterrorism, sticks their fingers in our eyes and tries to keep us from protecting our country. These are the other countries that have already designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist group. This is Bahrain, this is Russia, here's Syria, here's Egypt, here's Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. We wouldn't even be the first one to do it. And here's another encouraging headline that that President Trump is the first president to take on the MB, but partly because maybe of the impeachment fiasco and other things that have been going on, like trade deals, he hasn't yet addressed it. But I'm pretty confident, for example, if even somebody like myself actually had a full half hour to sit down with President Trump, have a cup of coffee, and really catch him on a good day, that he would become completely infuriated when he found out how thoroughly saturated his own administration is in terms of this organization, the Muslim Brotherhood. Iran, US backs Israel, and of course they're not going to support any effort to designate the Muslim Brotherhood, but I'm starting to weave in the role of Iran in this whole situation. They're lobbying and they're using their influence as much as they possibly can in order to prevent America from recognizing the nature of the threat, and they're backing up their friends and allies, the Muslim Brotherhood. The United States is supporting the biggest terrorist group in our region, and that is Israel, says Mr. Zarif. So that's their propaganda to the Islamic and the Arabic world, is that Israel is actually the terrorist, not any of these groups like Hamas, who they portray as liberation organizations, resistance organizations. Here's another just screenshot of the Iranians meeting with Morsi and trying to oppose any effort to designate them as a foreign terrorist organization. Trump's threat to the Muslim Brotherhood may be a gift to Egypt's president, but it should be far more. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, there they are again, was given the same designation last month. See, here's a fellow that thinks kind of like I do, that if the IRGC has been designated and the Muslim Brotherhood is closely affiliated, then by default 1 + 1 = 2, that the MB should also be designated. But let me stop here for a minute. Why is this also important? I'll just reiterate the statement I made earlier, that at this point in time, despite the fact that President Trump is in office, the Muslim Brotherhood is more thoroughly saturated into our government structure, both federal, state, and local, than they ever were at any time during the Obama administration. We have to address this. This is sabotage. This is a national security meltdown. And if we don't address it, then the only outcome is that it's going to get worse, not better. The network of alliances that wants to outlaw the MB, that's just one more. By the way, we'll make these notes and these slides available, and you can go and look at the links that I put in the notes section of every single one of these slides. And you can look all this information up yourself, because I know it's a lot to put forward, but I've documented every single thing that I say today. I don't exaggerate or overstate. There's no reason for me to. If you just take it at face value, it's troubling enough. So now we're up to May of 2019, about what, 8 months ago, something like that. Just a little bit more on this idea of designating the MB, and also to show you here the linkage between the MB and the IRGC to designate both of them as terrorist groups. Why Iran objects to a Muslim Brotherhood terrorist designation? Of course they would. That's just one more form of sanctions against the Iranian regime. And so of course they're not going to want, because that's just one more cord cut in their connections to the West. If we outright designate the MB, then all these other second and third level sanctions that are apparent vis-a-vis the nuclear deal are going to be taking effect within this other arena, and it's going to cut off a lot of their financial network too. Because once you designate a group as a terrorist organization, that means all their assets are frozen. So this could tie up an immeasurable amount of money that Iran and these other terrorist groups depend on for their activities. And by the way, we have them in here in America. They're called Hawala. That's Hawala networks. They're an underground currency market. And you walk through the door and you put $10,000 on the counter in Hamtramck, Michigan, and in a few minutes it pops out on the other side of the world in a bank in a lobby in the downtown Tehran. And where that money goes after that is anybody's guess. So that's why, of course, Iran would object to it. Shia Iran and Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, unlikely alliance, no more. Now we're up to June of last year. We're only talking about 6 months ago. Now this alliance is beginning to actually bubble up to the surface, where other people, besides specialists like us, that talk about this basically for a living, are realizing that this is a real thing. And therefore, these other countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, who have already designated the Muslim Brotherhood, you can see why this would be so concerning, because if these groups are operating and they're outlawed in their country, that means they're leaving themselves vulnerable to terrorist attacks if they don't become more assertive and make the connection between the IRGC. Of course, they're fighting against countries like Saudi Arabia and other Sunni countries every day. So there's one more good reason why to designate the MB as a terrorist organization. It provides better national security to all of our either good or even not so strong allies in that whole part of the world, which right now they're under threat, just like we are here in the United States, from splinter groups and cell groups that are connected to like Hezbollah or other militia groups operating out of places like Iran or the Lebanon. Iran's Islamic Republic and the Muslim Brotherhood. There's just one more illustration. This has become common knowledge. This fella here, Safavi, founded a group called the Fedayeen-i-Islam, the first Islamic terror group in modern Iran in 1946. And he played an important role in linking Shia Islamists to, put parenthetically, Sunni Islamics in other countries. And in 54, this isn't that long after the Muslim Brotherhood was founded, he met Sayyid Qutb. Well, there's another connection. Sayyid Qutb is the godfather of the modern Muslim Brotherhood meeting. And they had the same approaches, theologically, if you will, between these different topics, these different categories, in particular, jihad. And the necessity of bridging the Shia-Sunni divide to form a common front against what? Westernization of the Muslim world. And isn't that what Osama bin Laden was complaining about? Was the influence of the Americans and other Western countries in the Islamic area of the world. And that's why, by the way, he set up the emirate in Afghanistan. He wanted to prove to the world, including his own countrymen from Saudi Arabia, what a true emirate looks like, a fully Sharia compliant country. And that, by the way, is why he chose to operate out of Afghanistan. It was his laboratory. But of course, we know it didn't turn out quite the way he thought it might. Muslim Brotherhood subversion versus jihadi rage. And here you're talking about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Osama bin Laden, and Ayman al-Zawahiri. What do they have in common? That they're among the most notorious groups? Yes. They've all had careers as what? Members of the Muslim Brotherhood. So lo and behold, there they are again. Every time you turn around, you have connections to these groups. All of these MB groups remain alive and well and highly influential in the United States. And that's one of my points that I'm trying to make, friends. This isn't theory or abstract about things that are happening far, far away overseas. We're talking about known terrorist groups that are operating or have connections to groups that are operating here in the United States and have irrefutable ties to terrorism. So why in the world have we been taking so long to get around to acknowledging this in a legal sense? Well, I've already sort of answered that. It has to do with the State Department and the swamp, the deep state, that have their own reasons for not designating the Muslim Brotherhood. And they had their own reasons about why they should give $150 billion back to Iran, didn't they? And they had their own reasons about why they should develop the Iran nuclear deal, didn't they? And they had their own reasons why they were complaining about President Trump putting us in greater danger by taking out Qasem Soleimani. And they had their own reasons for shutting down Project Cassandra, which I was very familiar with when I was still active duty, which was the effort of my own agency to prevent the influence of Hezbollah and the IRGC from coming up through Mexico and drug trafficking and human trafficking and weapons trafficking and putting our national security at even more danger than it is already. Well, Obama shut that case down in 2012. And the consequences are what I call unnecessary threat, which we're seeing around us today. And by the way, he shut my case, the Tablighi Jamaat case, down at exactly the same time. I literally sat right next to the officer who ran the Project Cassandra case at the National Targeting Center when I worked there in 11 and 12. So yeah, I'm very familiar with what I call the national security meltdown. I saw it first person, eyewitness. It's not theoretical for me, it's real. And in some cases, it's even personal because people died because of it that didn't have to. And that's what I hope to prevent any more people from dying that don't have to because of policies that are blinding us. Here's the Iran Quds Force. That's Soleimani right there, by the way. And the Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood plotted to form an anti-Saudi alliance. Well, they're also plotting to form other kinds of anti-establishment alliances, including the one of our own government and or the influence that we hold with our different allies within the Middle East and even other parts of the world. This is Soleimani. He headed the Quds Force of the IRGC. And this is what? Not even, 2 months ago? Well, that was January 3rd when President Trump took him out. So his influence is now gone. And the person that has taken his place is nowhere the match in terms of his prestige and experience. The secret IRGC Muslim Brotherhood meeting proposed anti-Saudi alliance. By the way, look at the sources that I'm using. I'm not using Western sources. I'm using Middle Eastern sources, Al Arabiya, and different sources like that. So don't take my word for it. Go and read these articles and you'll find out that it's an open secret in that part of the world that the IRGC and the Muslim Brotherhood have been meeting together for a long time. And the beauty of it is that the Muslim Brotherhood is already saturated into the religious and social political structure of so many countries that they can act as the networkers, and then they can cooperate with the IRGC, and it's a perfect cooperative alliance. Muslim Brotherhood and the IRGC revealed in an intel leak, and by the way, this is to our good friends in Israel. You might remember that a while ago that President, or I should say Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, which I should also mention, they had a meeting today in the White House about the deal of the century. I haven't even had a chance to look at it yet, but I've heard a little bit that it sounds real good for Israel. Anyway, they found a great cache of documents a year or so ago and have revealed this alliance between the IRGC and the Brotherhood. See how it says? Could cover in 85 countries. So that's a pretty big footprint on the global level, wouldn't you say? That the Muslim Brotherhood, who is already, Muslim Brotherhood is like water in a glass. Every country is like a different shaped glass. You pour water into the glass, and the Muslim Brotherhood, like water itself, will take the shape of the glass. And so they're almost indistinguishable from the rest of the people in the country. And then herein behind them, as influence operators, comes the IRGC, the influence of Iran. And by the way, America is one of those 85 countries. So don't think, which I doubt you do, but don't think that this is only for everybody else and doesn't apply for us here in America. And they have a common enemy. Who is it? Israel and the United States. And this might be a good point or a good time to point out that there's another large coalition in the Indian subcontinent. They don't speak Arabic or Farsi. They speak Pashtun Urdu. They are known as the Deobandi branch of Islam. And they have the largest coalition now in the history of the Islamic world. It's called Al-Qaeda of the Indian subcontinent, AQIS. And they have a 20-page code of conduct written in nice, proper English grammar that tells you the same thing as this article here, that their common enemy is Israel and the United States. Now, friends, what better reason would there be to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group when we already know that they're affiliated with the IRGC and that they have a common enemy, which they put in their own words, Israel and the United States, and that even more than that, they're also allied with an immensely large coalition of jihadi groups operating out of the Asian subcontinent that have the same goal, the same common enemy, Israel and the United States. Well, right before he was eliminated from this world, Mr. Soleimani was warning America that they would destroy us. Now this, remember, he's not an ambassador, he's not a bureaucrat. he is the leader of a globally designated terrorist group. Do you think that maybe we should have taken him at face value? If Qasem Soleimani says that he's going to destroy us, do you think that's enough of a reason to take what he says at face value? And here we are right up to November 28th of 2019, where the same repetitive story, Iran, Hamas, IRGC, the Muslim Brotherhood, like a kaleidoscope. The MB, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the revolutionary clergy that rule Iran were in contact before the 78-79 Islamic revolt that felled the Shah. Hassan al-Banna established contact with Iran before he was assassinated in 1949. So now we're talking, what, 50, 60 years ago that this has been developing, and now it's come out into the full view. So what we're talking about isn't really new, but I would say for 99.9% of anybody in the administration, in the intelligence arena, in the political arena, don't know this, but they should. Kuala Lumpur Summit, 5 major issues facing the Muslim world. And Iran's Rouhani said his presence in Kuala Lumpur is part of a pivot to the east, a policy in an effort to pursue closer ties with major Asian countries. Now, what did I just mention a couple minutes ago? That there's an immense coalition of pro-jihad, Salafi, Sunni, Pashto Urdu speaking countries or jihad groups operating out of the Asian subcontinent. So he's just proving, in Iran's Rouhani's own words, proving what my premise is, that they are definitely pivoting to the east, and that the entire center of gravity of the global Islamic movement is not going west, it's going east toward the countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan and India and Bangladesh and Myanmar, the home territory of the global level Al-Qaeda of the Indian subcontinent, which includes groups like the Taliban and the one you've heard me talk about before, the Tablighi Jamaat, which were involved with the San Bernardino shootings, indirectly with the Orlando shootings, and also directly with the Tawhid Jamaat attacks in Sri Lanka. So there's a lot of connections here, friends. So what did the mainstream press say? They said that the direct hit on terror leader Qasem Soleimani was a threat. Then they were worried that now the Iranians are going to threaten retaliation. Well, how much more of a threat do you need than the Iranian government screaming at the top of their voice virtually every single day somewhere in the world, particularly in Iran, that death to America, death to Israel? They've been doing it for 40 years. So why all of a sudden do you suppose people are all suddenly worried about what Iran might say because Qasem Soleimani has been taken out? And here's another article that was published by my buddy and colleague Jim Phelps a couple days after the targeted strike against Qasem Soleimani, where I mentioned that I had a pretty strong feeling that Israel was involved in it in terms of human intel. And a few days later, I was proven to be correct, because these kind of precision strikes have to have good human intel on the ground. And who better to have assets that speak these foreign languages with no accent, because their mom and their dad or their grandpa and their grandma grew up in Iran or in Syria or in Iraq and taught their little babies to speak these languages with no accent. And so they can actually go and blend right in with the regular rest of the people that live there, and no one ever knows that they're actually Israeli. And I wanted to point this out. I've been talking about this connection with Iran. You see Iran here. There's Iraq. There's Kuwait. Down in this place called Zahedan. And look where it is. It's right on the tri-border area. Here's Afghanistan. Here's Pakistan. They come to a point, and lo and behold, in a handy-dandy location is Zahedan. And this, my friends, is the funnel point for a lot of those legions of fighters that were coming from the East and or people that are funneling through from the West that want to join the jihad in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. And that's why India, further to the east, is such an important ally. And I just finished writing an article which will come out in a journal called Defense and Security Alert, I think in February, about this very strategic part of the world and why United States has been developing a much stronger alliance with Iran than we've ever had, not Iran, with India than we've ever had before. And so maybe I can post it on the United West website or the Crime Stoppers website, and you that are watching can pick up the article and see a little bit more detail about what I'm referring to here. But Iran, again, is right in the center of this whole, it's a hub that this big wheel turns on. Soleimani was commander of this whole operation. President Trump put a stop to it. And I hope that some of the insights and PowerPoint slides that I've showed you will help you realize that what President Trump was a spectacular intervention in the defense of our national security and our border protection. Here's our Ilhan Omar making a public statement about, she says what? We are no more safer. I'm not sure if that's proper grammar today than we were yesterday. Well, here are members of Congress who, rather than stand up and acknowledge that this individual was a globally designated terrorist, are defending him and criticizing the president. So who exactly do these people work for? And there is Ocasio-Cortez, and there's Ilhan Omar, and there is, I forget her name, part of the squad, criticizing the president for taking care of our national security. Now here's another article that we just put out. When I say we, I mean Jim Phelps and I. Is the threat of suicide bombings against Americans in the Middle East imminent? Well, if you read the whole article, you'll see it absolutely is imminent. After the targeted strike of Qasem Soleimani, I'd say maybe 10 or 15 different major jihad groups from different parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East, came out and made very clear declarations about their intentions to target Americans in the Middle East and or their assets and or their resources. And so what my agency did is initiated an IDSO, an intelligence-driven special operation, which I'll get to in a minute, watching the northern and the southern borders a lot more carefully than maybe even they did before. And here's another article about the emerging threat, about these Salafi Muslims that are making threats to conduct jihad operations inside continental Europe, in places like Germany and France, which you know very well they already have done. This is only 5 days ago. So that's the last slide in my presentation today. And so I have this here to show you something very interesting. If you can see this on your screen and you hold up a piece of paper, you will notice, I'll even use my phone, you can use any object, hold it up against what appear to be those crooked lines, and you'll find that they're not crooked. They're actually straight. It's an optical illusion. And my point of showing this is that don't be fooled what you think you see. So what keeps us with our vision straight in this world we live in? Well, from a political perspective, it's the Constitution. And so your first response constitutionally against the implementation of Sharia law here in America, which after all is the ultimate goal of all this activity in the world, isn't really jihad at all. It's to implement Sharia law. Well, you look at Article 6 and you find out that it's a violation of the basic premise of Article 6. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, period. Not Sharia, not an Antifa statement. No, it's the Constitution. And if you have a biblical worldview, then of course there are plenty of examples I could cite from the Bible that will help you keep your vision aligned correctly and not get misled or deceived into thinking that these people are just our friends and that we can just have interfaith dialogue and practice diversity and inclusion, and that we'll all just get along fine. And as speaking of another subject, maybe down the road, I can talk about the latest developments in what I called the Alliance of Virtue for the Common Good, which is now called the Abrahamic Covenant movement, which is now being endorsed by up to and including the Pope, and sorry to say, clear up to and including Vice President Pence, and clear up including the liaison for international religious freedom, Sam Brownback from the State Department, and our old friend Imam Majid from the ISNA, the Imam of the Adams Center in Washington, D.C. In other words, a Muslim Brotherhood high-level leader is taking the lead on this whole global Abrahamic covenant. So we've been co-opted once again, and this time it's in the faith arena. So when I talk about optical illusions here, I'm not just talking theoretical. Even people within the faith community are being misled at this very moment into thinking that those lines are not straight, that there is more to what that picture shows us than meets the eye. So with that, I think we're ready for questions.
All right. Had to figure out which buttons to push here. Excellent presentation. Philip, you're doing such a great job at identifying all of this. A couple questions come to mind that there's been so many in the national security circuit that talk about the foreign terrorist organization definition and why the Muslim Brotherhood would not qualify. What are your thoughts on whether or not they really qualify, as much as all of those articles look to be something that Trump is going to be taking on? Does the Muslim Brotherhood really qualify for designation, or are they more of a subversive to the U.S. Constitution?
Well, where are the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood? Egypt.
Yeah.
Where was it founded?
Egypt.
Is the Muslim Brotherhood an American organization? No. There's virtually no Muslim organization operating in the United States that originated here. They're all affiliated, most of them, with the Muslim Brotherhood. It isn't a domestic organization. It is a foreign organization operating here because members of its organization have gained citizenship and status here.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't change the definition of the organization itself.
But from the standpoint of terrorism, they're not actively terrorists in terms of violence.
They're affiliated with the globally designated terrorist organization.
The IRGC
affiliated.
now, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So by default, you know, they are. And that's a semantic thing.
Okay.
So one branch, maybe the Quds Force within the IRGC, they're the ones that are the designated operators. They do the violent. But the Muslim Brotherhood knows about them. They support them. So you can't separate. It's like trying to separate the blood from the breath from the body. We know that our breath is different. We can feel it. We know that our blood is separate or distinct from our breath. We know our body is distinct from the breath and the blood. But can you separate them? And what happens if you try to? So they're distinct, but yet they're not. And that's the same way with these groups. The IRGC is distinct culturally, linguistically, maybe personnel from the Muslim Brotherhood, but they're really not. They're really one. They're unified. And so semantic terminology and fine points, the only thing that's going to result from that is more and more of the same thing that we've been seeing. And the other amazing point to bring up about the designation is that you could do it all without firing a single shot or dropping a single bomb anywhere. Why don't we conduct foreign policy and domestic counterterrorism policy on that basis? You can designate an entire organization and never fire a single shot.
You're talking about through Mike Pence?
Yeah, through through a legislative and executive action, through law
Okay.
enforcement action. Just shut them down. Do not allow CARE to parade their way through the halls of the Rayburn
Yeah,
building
yeah.
and Cannon building and the Longworth building and the Hart building on the Senate side, and have members of Congress writing letters of endorsement to them, and having members of Congress speaking at CARE events. Right?
Yep.
That's what I mean.
Do you think that Trump is waiting until his re-election? Do you think designating the Muslim Brotherhood at this time in the election process would be difficult for him to get re-elected, or do you think that would be a beneficial thing for him? I'm thinking he's going to wait.
I think he's savvy enough that he could be doing that.
Mm.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was. I'd feel a little better if I knew he was.
Yeah.
I can keep a secret too. I don't have to tell everybody, but I haven't seen an indicator particularly.
Yeah.
It's been awfully quiet in that arena. And the other problem I see is members of Congress are still writing letters of endorsement to
Yeah.
CARE. And the other indicator, which is, we could get into the whole nother PowerPoint here, but I mentioned earlier that the saturation level in this administration is higher, deeper, and broader than even during the Obama. The Muslim Brotherhood are in the DOD, the FBI, the DOJ, the State Department, DHS, my agency, every one of them. They've been brought in and given positions of authority to make domestic and foreign policy and become the arbiters of the DHS's new strategy document that was released in, I think, September, that their new focus is now going to be on white supremacy, which is not even a legally defined term.
Right.
And so who are they choosing to be the arbiters of this? Impact, Muslim Public Affairs Council, who then made a plain announcement in public that our buddies, CARE, are going to be working with us. Now, there's no excuse for that. And as I said earlier, I think President Trump actually had a half hour and with a cup of coffee, and I actually was able to show him this. I believe he'd be infuriated. I have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he doesn't know it, because he's been so overwhelmed by so many other things. And that's another problem I call the emphasis on the wrong syllable. This is actually one of the most important threats that we have, not way down number 10 or 15 or 20 on the list, because there are so many moving parts in these alliances. There's Sharia implementation in towns and cities like in Michigan and Minnesota. There's fraud, there's visa, there's hawala networks, there's money laundering, there's female genital mutilation, there's child marriages, there's domestic violence. There's all these different aspects of Islamic culture that we don't seem to be able to effectively or capably deal with, because we're intimidated and coerced into thinking that somehow that's going to be a violation of the basic fundamental rights that we have as Americans. But no, it's not.
Well, Philip, I have a question or a comment maybe. Can we turn the sock inside out? If you've got 102 people in Congress that have written letters to support CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood, on the other hand, down the street at the executive branch, we're basically at war with Iran. We've taken out their primary Quds leader. So if the premise that you're putting together very well today is support for the Muslim Brotherhood is in fact support for their ally, Iran, then we have a major part of the U.S. Congress supporting Iran because they're supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, you know, we were at some point, I think the other observation I would make, and then just get your comment, we don't have the saturation, which is a wonderful image that you gave us a couple of years ago, is so overwhelming that we don't have any indictments of any kind. You know, Al Capone was brought down because of an income tax problem.
Yep.
I mean, we know there's all kind of drug trafficking and, you know, welfare fraud, but we really don't seem to be able to indict people who happen to be associated with Islam.
Well, it's even more fundamental than that. Not only do we not seem to be able to indict them, we've had a number of people, a long roster of people in the administration who have not only just not been capable of indicting, but have deliberately and intentionally destroyed classified intelligence that would allow us to do it, and shut down cases that would have allowed us to do it. It's no wonder. They destroyed, it's like going around in one of the movies and they shoot out all the cameras in the hallway. They shot out all the cameras that allowed us to kind of watch what was going on in our arena, in our domain. And yes, to his credit, President Trump is starting to repair some of this stuff.
I guess the point I'm making is that the number of points of wrong, of evil, is overwhelming. It's at every different aspect of life. You have Saudi Arabian students who were indicted for rape, who somehow get out of the country. You have these people that are allowed to leave the country under strange circumstances. I don't know whether that's the Border Patrol or who that is, Philip, but we have all kinds of favoritism being given to criminals because they're associated with Muslim organizations and Muslim countries that we just want to look the other way.
One of our supposed friends. Now, the Pensacola Saudis.
Thank you.
They just disappeared overnight. Where'd they go?
Yep.
There was something in the teens, I think 16, 18.
Right.
One day they were there and the next day they're all gone. And there's like, whatever we seem to write on the chalkboard, that we got people coming right immediately behind us and erasing it as fast as you can write it. Just to kind of say that it never happened. And I remember when you and I were together in Michigan, the Toronto shooting happened. Yeah. And I said to you all, watch how fast this disappears from the media chalkboard. And I said to you who he was, that he was well trained, and he was very likely, and it didn't last 2 days. And the Pensacola story barely lasted 2 days. When's the last time you heard anything about it? Now, has any of the people that were hurt or injured in that attack, have we seen any of their faces on the media nightly news? Any kind of opportunity to honor them and recognize them for their service? No, we haven't heard a thing, have we? It's just gone. That's got to stop. And that's the thing that infuriates to me the most as being a cop myself, is that there's so many aspects of these things that happen that undermine and discourage law enforcement officers from doing their job because we're not getting the backup and the support. Now, is President Trump better than any president I think I can think of in our lifetime? Maybe than Reagan? Yeah. But we still got a long ways to go because we went so far backwards.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe another term with President Trump, he might go high speed, low drag after that. I hope he does. And I've said before, and I will say it again tonight, I will come back and help him. But for me to go right now, I might as well dive headfirst into a meat grinder. I literally I wouldn't last a day. I mean, literally. If I gave this presentation right here, with all these points about the Muslim Brotherhood, before I was even done with the PowerPoint, there'd be somebody in that room, or several, that would send a text or go type an email that would accuse me of Islamophobia, white supremacy, racism, and I wouldn't even finish the PowerPoint before I'd probably get some sort of a notification. Mr. Haney, can we talk to you for a moment? It would be that bad. So why would I even consider going anywhere? Because the reason for all this, there's several reasons, but one of them is that they have this false narrative about who our friends and our enemies are. But the other one is those people don't want me within 50 miles of Washington. Because the people that deleted the records that I've talked about for all these years now are still in the administration. They were all promoted. They're still active duty now. What do you think they're going to feel like if they have somebody like me with a letter from the president saying, I have the authority to bring this information back and bring to account those who deleted it? You're here screaming from Washington all the way to here in California. You would.
Well, that letter from the president from some super high level sponsor would be critical. The swamp is still so deep. The Congress and the executive branch are so corrupt that it would take that letter And I guess, again, I think you do a wonderful job of balancing out these things. Of course, Donald Trump's done a great job. Mike Pompeo has done a great job, but when there's a blind spot called Sam Brownback, you point that out. And just visit with the
That
Pope.
doesn't make me real popular.
That's okay.
Speaking of blind spot, I thought of this interesting allegory. When you're driving a car, most of your attention is in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's in the rear. You watch your rear view mirror, make sure somebody's not coming up behind you, right?
Yep.
And then the other points that you have to stay constantly monitoring are the rear view mirrors, right? So you got front, back, and side. But there's a fourth one that's the most intriguing one of all. It's the most dangerous one of all. And it's the smallest one. It's the blind spot. Now, when you're a driver, if you get into a crash and it turns out that's because of the blind spot, are you exempt from responsibility?
No.
You're supposed to know where the blind spot is. That's part of your duty as a driver, isn't it? But the intriguing thing about it is that the blind spot is the closest one to you. It's closer to you than the side mirror. It's closer to what's in front, and it's closer to what's behind you. It's within this far of you. It's the most
frightening visual.
one, but you don't see it unless you do one particular thing. You adjust your perspective. And that's what we need to do nationally, is adjust our perspective so that we actually do see the fact that that blind spot has been right there 2 feet away from our head the whole time.
So Philip and Mary, I know we want to get to our question. I just want to round out one comment. You did mention, and thank you, Philip, you mentioned Pensacola. We are aware that, again, Mr. Barr is doing a great job. However, for Mr. Barr, Attorney General Barr, to wrap up Pensacola in a package and put a bow on it and say that the man in Pensacola was a lone wolf and had no connections inside of America that would have been part of a network that would have driven him to the murder that he committed. Well, that's incredible. You're well aware of the impact that mosques have. And without going into the mosque in Pensacola and doing a thorough study, because the people that come in from Saudi Arabia go to Pensacola, stay there for weeks under training, they go off the base, they have a life, they associate with people from their countries. There are two Wahhabi mosques within walking distance of the base, and at those mosques, we are very well aware through a mosque investigation that those people talk about jihad in the mosque. They talk about full Sharia. They talk about all kind of crimes we consider crimes against women and children, and they talk about the evil infidel. So to not evaluate formally by the federal government the mosque in Pensacola is irresponsible, just like people that got rid of your records and
that's their primary duty. One of the things that I learned when I was still active duty was that when Saudi students come here for any kind of education or training, they're always met by a member of the consulate or the embassy.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically sit them down and then remind them why they're really here. They're here for training, yes. They're here for education, yes. But that's not the real reason why they're here. It's to represent Islam and do dawah. Dawah, we know, is the Arabic word for the promotion or the propagation, like evangelism. That's the closest term. To do Islamic evangelism while you're here. That is their main reason for being here. And the fact that seems that we're incoherent to that 20 years now almost after 9/11, that's what astonishes me. We have a blind spot and we keep refusing to acknowledge that we have the blind spot. And so the consequences of it is that people keep getting hurt.
Yeah.
And the driver of the car never seems to have to take responsibility for the accidents that he causes. Other people get hurt. Other people's property gets damaged. But the driver of the car, in this case the government, is never held accountable for anything that they do. And you can't, no matter what you seem to do, to try to show them, look, there's a blind spot right there. You're doing real good on looking ahead, doing a fine job on that. You know, you're staying, you're not tailgating, you're using your signal lights, you're doing great. Ditto with what's behind you. You're doing good there too. And you're doing pretty good on the side mirrors too. But that blind spot, nope. That one definitely needs to be addressed. And that's where we are. We have a blind spot. And for some strange reason, deep kind of a reason, we still haven't been able to address it yet.
Well, Philip, let's invite Mary to get us to the questions. By the way, I appreciate the attendees listening to our interaction and our questions. They're waiting in line to talk to Philip Haney. So Mary, why don't you get going? Thank you.
All right, we do have quite a few here, Philip, for you. Philip, a report from February 2017 stated that the Muslim Brotherhood was spending $5 million in a PR campaign to lobby Congress so that the Muslim Brotherhood would not be designated a terror group. Mm-hmm. It appears our own elected officials are being swayed to side with the MB. Your thoughts?
Well, it's easy to prove that. Real easy. There's 2 caches of letters that have come out. Mm-hmm. Something around 100 plus, and another new cache of around 120 members of Congress, which is about a quarter of the total number of representatives, have all signed letters of endorsement to CARE on official government stationery. So there's proof of your question right there. It did work, didn't it?
Yeah.
Not only did they not take steps to even give it fair review, they actually turned around and endorsed the very organizations that we would be designating. That all started back in Michelle Bachmann's time in 2012, when she wrote those 5 letters with 4 other members of Congress, Louis Gohmert, Trent Franks, Lynn Westmoreland of Georgia, and a fellow from Florida, asking the inspector generals of the 5 different agencies related to either law enforcement or counterterrorism to look in the affiliations of the Muslim Brotherhood within the federal government, in particular, the affiliation between Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin. And you might remember what happened to Michelle Bachmann.
Yep.
She was run over with a steamroller. She resigned.
By her own party.
Right, exactly.
By Mike Rogers, John McCain,
yep,
and the chairman of the Intel Committee.
And probably Lindsey Graham, I'm not sure about that.
It starts with a B, John Boehner. Yeah.
Yep.
They publicly attacked her.
Yep.
They defended the Muslim Brotherhood. These are Republicans.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
When will your new book be available?
Hopefully mid to late spring. That's my target time.
Excellent.
I want to try to catch the wave. I call it the sound wall or the noise wall. In other words, the lead up to the real campaign, starting in the spring, early spring, or a mid to late spring, and have it out there like I did with See Something, Say Nothing, so it becomes part of the national vocabulary.
Good.
That's what I'm aiming for.
How can we eradicate the terror cells in the U.S.? It seems like we know exactly where they are.
A good place to start would be designate the Muslim Brotherhood. That'd knock out a whole bunch of them right there. Because terrorists don't just wear green bandanas and carry AK-47s.
Yep.
We got to start with what's right in front of us. If we can't recognize the nature of the threat that's standing literally in front of us, we don't have the wherewithal to do that, then why bother conducting operations in foreign arenas?
Yeah.
It's not going to do us very much good at all, with a few exceptions like Soleimani. If we try to conduct our counterterrorism and national security policies overseas, but we don't even have the capacity or the wherewithal to recognize the nature of the threat is literally standing right in front of us, then we haven't got to where we need to be yet. That's the canary in the coal mine. If you want to know when the time comes when our national security apparatus is actually serious about it, wait till they designate them. The rest of it is just want. That's all it is. Because if they don't have the wherewithal to find a way to do it, that tells you they're not serious yet. They can't be. That's like taking an aspirin for a splinter. Take this aspirin, you'll feel better. Well, what about the splinter in my hand? Just take 2 aspirin. That's not the way to do it. You got to get rid of the splinter, then take the aspirin, then you really will feel better.
Agreed. Okay, how can we know if a local mosque is an affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood?
Make friends with one of your Christian or non-Muslim Arab-speaking buddies and let them go and listen. That's one way.
Invite Dave Gobbets to come in as well.
Well, that's a little bit more of a hammer, but
well, it's interesting, Philip. You can even go to the website and look at the leadership of the mosque. You can look at the committees, the newsletter, and just put that name in.
You used to be able to do that, but they figured it out.
Okay.
Fellows like myself,
okay,
they got the word pretty fast that a lot of their information was getting downloaded right off their own websites, and they started scrubbing it.
Okay.
Of course, I captured a lot of that stuff, and the government did their very best to destroy it, but I ended up giving it to Congress. I basically created an archive of the history of this subject all the way from 9/11 right up to close to 2015, and kept all of it, 42,000 files.
You've got to get that meeting with the somebody who knows the president and get that letter from the president and get back in. This is just.
Well, I need a letter to go to the president, and I need another letter to go out from the president.
Okay.
Because I've
two letters away from turning a corner.
That's right. It's not a boast. These are things that could be done.
Oh yeah.
But, I would say to President Trump, sir, I can guarantee you that at the 2 or 3 ports where we start this program, that I will double or triple the stats in the first month. Well, Mr. Haney, that's a bold statement. You know I like numbers, but how in the world could you make such an assertion so confidently? I said it's not hard to improve on a near zero.
Maybe we need a reality show with Donald Trump sitting behind a desk and people coming up making proposals to him to be his apprentice or to be his. Maybe that would be an idea. I think maybe somebody did that already.
Oh, but see, the reason why I know that is I have a lot of friends who are still active duty.
Yeah.
And I'm the only one of this whole bunch of my colleagues and buddies in law enforcement that has retired yet, that were involved in it as much as I was. A lot of them I chose to mentor were younger by 1 generation at least. They're still doing their career. And they tell me all the time, Mr. Haney, it's worse than you said, but I'm sure glad you told me when you did, because they become really good officers, but they're continuously frustrated because there are all kinds of procedures and policies in place that still block them from doing their job. And I could address that.
This would say that
blow up like that real quick.
This would say that in DHS today, the growing file is on white supremacists, not on the Muslim Brotherhood, because DHS is all concerned about white supremacy.
Yeah, and the worst part of that is, even if it were true somehow, we certainly don't need the Muslim Brotherhood in there being the arbitrators of who, arbiters of who a white supremacist is. Yeah. But that's the status.
There you go.
That's the status of it right now.
Okay, let's get back to the questions. We've got a lot of them building up here.
Go, Mary.
Any comments about the Tri-Faith complex in Abu Dhabi? Who are the power players? Is this related to the Muslim Brotherhood?
Absolutely. Imam Majid, his name is Majid Ali, the Imam of the Adams Center in Washington, is the lead on this whole project. It's 100% Muslim Brotherhood influence operation. It started out of Jordan, out of an institute called Al-Bayt, which means people of the house. The house of what? The house of Islam. And the whole premise from Suwain, that's Quran chapter 364, come let us agree to have a common word between us. They never finish the sentence. The rest of the verse says that we all worship Allah. This is the common word. This is the alliance of virtue, and now it's become the Abrahamic covenant. Yes, it's Muslim Brotherhood up to here.
Okay, Lucy's asking, how much influence does Mike Pence have on President Trump? Donald Trump Jr. certainly knows about Islamic terrorism. She just read his book.
Well, influence, or you can turn that around and say opportunity to influence the president. I wouldn't mind talking to President or Vice President Trump the same as President Trump.
Pence, you mean Pence?
That's what I meant, Pence, because whoever at that point of contact, like an electric circuit, wherever I can stick the cord of the lamp into the wall, I'm happy with it. I just want to get the lamp plugged into the wall, because there's a lot of fumbling around in darkness right now that isn't necessary. The information is there. And this is not going to end well. It can't. And the people who are going to be hurt are the same ones that are always hurt. The innocents, the evangelicals, the Christians in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And all this effort that we put in to try to bring this to light is going to be subverted by these influence operators. Who are going to turn the whole equation around and turn the Muslims into the victims. And that's what they're doing.
Okay, let's see. Any comments on the article today reporting that Saudi Arabia is no longer going to finance mosques across the world?
All I would say is that whoever's interested in that subject, make it a project, like you're developing a case.
Good idea.
So they made it a statement, they put it out in public. Now, just like in law enforcement, now the real work begins. Start compiling, archiving information, and one of the 5 major points of developing a case, which is part of the art that we've lost, is to follow up. Don't just look at it once or twice and then forget about it. You have to make it a deliberate and intentional effort to stay involved and track that issue. That's how people become subject matter experts. If I am one, that's how I became one. I started with a blank piece of paper, a blank spreadsheet. I put 1 number in it, then 5, then 100, then 1,000. And after a while, you have a complete picture. And that's another thing I say, let the picture draw itself. You don't have to force it. It's like planting corn and watching it grow. You just let it grow. And you monitor it, you nurture it, you take care of it. And at a certain point, there it is, you will see it. And that's how it always works. Whether you're a civilian tracking an issue, or whether you're law enforcement, whether you're in intelligence, whether you're in government, it's always the same. Connect the dots. So that's what I would suggest. If this is something you're intrigued by, then make it a special project and share it with other people. Maybe one day they'll be on this program talking about what they found out about Saudi Arabia and their financing of madrasas and mosques all over the world.
All right, we've got an individual asking what can they do to get the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a foreign terrorist organization.
Go through your chain of command. Start with your representative from your state, whatever your district is. Make a phone call. Do that. Write down in your little diary when you did it. And also send a follow-up letter, or do them at the same time. Or send the letter first and wait a few days and then give them a call and ask them if they received your letter. Don't say that it doesn't make a difference, because the point of it all is, even if they didn't respond to you, you have done your part. You've put it into the historical record. You can hold it up and say, yes, I wrote a letter. Yes, I made a phone call. And if enough people did that, it would make a difference. But don't worry about what everybody else does. Start with what you can do. Put it into the record. Do a little bit of research. Find out, first of all, if your representative from the House is one of the 120 that wrote a letter to CARE.
There you go.
Start with that.
There you go. Good idea. We've got somebody asking, was the Muslim Brotherhood involved in taking out Sadat?
I think they were. Yes, I'm pretty sure they were involved in that.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. It's been a while since I looked at, but I'd be, being a former cop, I'd be willing to bet a coffee and a donut that it was.
It's a lot, the donut. Go ahead.
You know how much cops love donuts. To bet a whole donut, ooh, that's putting myself out there on that one.
I might have to edit that out.
Really? No wagering on this program, huh?
That's right. Do you agree that a huge part of the problem is an ignorance of what Sharia is?
For sure. Not just Sharia, but yes. Considering that's ultimately their goal, then I guess in one way you could say yes, that being ignorant of Sharia is a big part of the problem. And that can be remedied pretty easily too. You can get the Reliance of the Traveler online.
Yeah.
It's a big giant PDF file, but you can get it. You can start reading it.
Okay, let's see. We've got a lot of little ones here. I think I already asked this one. Just heard about Saudi Arabia has agreed to stop funding mosques and U.S. and elsewhere.
Okay.
Did they implement that across just the U.S. or do we know anything more about that?
Well, no, it's supposed to be international.
Okay.
I don't know if that really was even the focus of the U.S., but I'd like to see what they're going to do with the 40 to 50,000 madrasas in Pakistan and India and Afghanistan. That'll be intriguing to me.
Well, I think that's going to...
Philip, it may be that they're saying they don't need to invest in any more. They've already reached critical mass.
There you go.
You look at the level of exponential growth in Germany and America. I mean, they may just not need to do it.
Yeah,
they've reached critical mass.
So that would be what you call cynical, wouldn't it? Meaning
that would be cynical, and that would be really bad news if they've come to the conclusion they don't need to do it anymore.
Yeah, we've already robbed you blind, so we don't need to take any more from you.
I think that's going to be it for tonight. I think they're popping in like crazy, but we need to realize everybody's time and be respectful of that. So let's finish out, and if there's any questions I can get to Philip later, I will try and do that.
Just let me say thank you, everyone. I hope that it was informative. I'm looking forward to doing some more. I hope that I can come on one of these times and talk about some really, really, really good things that have happened in the last few weeks and months.
Well, Philip Haney, thank you so much. And once again, everybody that listens to this tonight, know that you covered every nook and cranny on this topic, because that's what you do. You take us through chapter and verse. Everything is footnoted. You make the material available. People can do their homework. I think we could also make the comment about whether people, after 18, 19 years of all of this, are just too lazy to learn. I mean, information about Sharia, we have so much information, and you do a superb job of adding to that. But I think we need to start challenging people just to ask whether they care enough to learn and investigate and ask questions. Again, we appreciate everybody that's on tonight.
Well, they're going to learn about it one way or another. Sorry to overtalk you, but
no, go ahead.
Choice. Would you rather be proactive about it, or would you rather have it run you over?
Right. It would be terrible to wake up after a catastrophe and remember all the things that some people were saying, the cry in the wilderness. So, Philip Haney, thank you once again. We appreciate it, and we wish we need you to have a great 2020. That'll be a wonderful indicator for the country.
I hope so. Thank you, friend. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off now, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you, Philip.
All right. Thanks for being with us tonight, Phil.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So attendees, we're going to just wrap it up quickly. We have the Tom Trento program at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's available. People all over the country can get to it at iHeartRadio. Simply look up WNN, and you'll be able to see what's going on in southern Florida, but it affects the whole country. We keep moving along. Tonight's Tuesday. That means next Monday we have a news analysis program. It'll be February 3rd. That means it's Christine Douglas-Williams' turn. She alternates with Claire Lopez. The posting of Claire Lopez and Philip this week's webinars will be done soon and will be available on United West. So we thank our friend Mary for all of that work. Again, Tom Trento's radio programs daily are posted there as well. The website is great, and thank you, Mary, very much.
Welcome.
So that gets us to next Monday, February 3rd. The next day would be a Tuesday, and of course, we have to do a webinar. This is a great opportunity. This is how I got started. Curtis Bowers is the producer and of Agenda 2, etc. I saw that 8 years ago, whatever, and I never did the same. He'll be with us next week, and he is going to make the comment that the left's real agenda, which he's been following every day, is worse now than most people know. Again, this is the man who understands the agendas in depth, and he's going to give us his view of where we are today. Another Tuesday is coming. That would be the 11th, and Steve Kirby will be back with us again. A very, very important presentation. He's going to talk about the dilemma of Muslim public officials. They have to choose between the Sharia and the Constitution. They can't do both. How do we vet them? How do we know as candidates and as officials where their allegiance lies? So he'll be with us on the 11th. We have 2 more people coming in February. I want you to know David Boris, co-founder. The reason we do what we do is David Boris and his nonstop analysis and of things that law enforcement ought to know, things that citizen ought to know. He will be giving us a briefing on the 18th. And Raymond Ibrahim, just a wonderful scholar and expert on all things Sharia and Islamic and the impact on Christianity, will be with us on the 25th. The topics for them will be filled in and they will be timely. So we're holding right now on the topics, but you'll see them. So mark those calendars if you would, please. We'd like to talk about action items in a few minutes that we've got left here. We just want you to, we're going to start a new emphasis. We talk about making America think again. That's one of the mottos for Tom Trento and the United West. We want them to think specifically about their life in the 4 years that start next January, on 21 to 24. What will your life, their life, be like if this man, Mr. Donald Trump, is not the president? And we want you to focus on your individual lives, start conversations with other people. So for example, 2021, no Trump, borders wide open, could be Bernie, could be anybody else, borders would be impacted. Well, what does that mean to your personal safety, to your health? We have an international potential epidemic, lots of new people coming into the country, the third world. How does that affect the U.S. debt, taxes, savings, etc.? What might happen to your 401k over that period of time? We just heard about the Abrahamic family. This is the next step in interfaith. This is the Pope. This is the Muslim Brotherhood in America and worldwide. The Pope is absolutely talking about one world religion. The Pope has a major impact on people's thinking and elections. So this is a real serious. What will happen next year without Donald Trump on this incredibly exponential growing movement?
We need people to understand this Abrahamic family house is not the first one. There is actually one in Omaha, Nebraska that was started many years ago. It was a former golf course that they bought, and they have now got a church, a synagogue, and the last thing to be, well, not the last thing, but then they're building a mosque. And then the last thing they're building is this huge community center.
Exactly.
$65 million project, all based on donations. And Dr. Mark Christian has been fighting it for years. Heavy donations from the Buffett family out there in Nebraska. So, I mean, it was an area that was very difficult to fight. But he stood against it and tried to fight it as best he could. So he knows a lot about it. We might ask him to talk about it. So one world religion, yeah, it's been forming for many years.
Watch what happens with the Pope's upcoming meeting with Sam Brownback on this topic. The energy is growing every single day. Again, we have Israel thinks they deal with the war every day because they're on war footing. We are asleep and the war is happening every day. Watch this space. So what will happen a year from now? Chance of any mosque investigations without Trump next year as this thing continues would be very unlikely. The Jew hatred, the Christian hatred we see would just be continuing to go. There'd be really unfettered. Some people call that dimitude. In the United States, without Donald Trump, would we be living as Jews and Christians, evangelicals and Jews, as second-class citizens? Would it be like the time before
Pretty close.
Germany in 1939? This whole notion that children don't belong to you and me as parents, somehow they belong to the state. If you really want to homeschool in 2023, there might be something which would make it difficult or impossible. Certainly, there are people that think children really belong to the state. This whole abortion thing, gee, a year from now without Donald Trump, you just saw what he just did this last week to the pro-life organization. Infanticide, how much longer can old people live? I mean, this is not going to be the same without Donald Trump. That would be, well, let's just face it, there'd be a lot more dead human beings without. The ability for Philip Haney, Robert Spencer, David Boris, Tom Trento to speak aggressively like we do without Donald Trump a year from now, 2 years from now, some of these people would be declared enemies of the state. We heard Bernie Sanders, campaign person in Iowa, talk about gulags. Well, if we can't talk about things that offend people, including the Sharia folks, is that the enforcement of their blasphemy laws? You can see a pattern here. There are people in Virginia that want to take your guns away. What would it be like a year from now across the country? The ability for what we consider to be pedophilia to be incrementally acceptable if a major part of the part of the country, people who practice Sharia, if what we consider crimes are normalized without a Donald Trump, if the Muslim Brotherhood is still actively moving, if mosques are still happening unfettered, uninvestigated, no indictments of imams, these kind of Sharia crimes are going to be increasing, not decreasing. We know that in certain countries, when the Marxists and the Sharia folks, Islamist people got together and caused a revolution, shortly after that revolution, it was the Marxists who came under the assault of the Islamic forces. So this is just, again, we're just saying what if. These are hypothetical speculatives, but if a 4-year period happened with an aggressive Marxist running the country that had the help of the Muslims in America, it's certainly possible, given other history, that the Muslims would start to control the government. Somebody like Keith Ellison, who might be part of the administration in the Bernie Sanders administration, might all of a sudden have more power than Bernie himself. And of course, what would happen in 21, 22, 23, and 24 to our partner, our ally, Israel, if we have no Donald Trump? These are just things to get you thinking, and that's the whole idea. Almost done. The clock is ticking. We've got 40 weeks. Most of those weeks, we will have one or more webinars for you. We'll have Tom Trento radio programs. Those are resources for you. We talked about terror again. We keep remembering that sedition is equally as terrible, and we need to keep working on trying to make the case for sedition. When will there be an indictment for sedition? Philip's done a great job of talking to us about the Sunni Shia union when it comes to taking out America or Israel. We tend to think of part of these people as being clever, maybe the Shia, more brutal, maybe the Sunnis. In either way, it's a 1-2 punch we cannot withstand. We have a few candidates popping up around the country who will actually talk about this, not many. And if we see them, we need to support them, even if it's just getting their message out, whether they're in our district, in our state. For example, in the state of Maryland, there's a candidate named Jim Simpson. You know Jim Simpson. That's the Red-Green Axis guy. You mean Jim Simpson is sacrificing his entire situation for 2020 by running for office as a congressman in the 2nd District of Maryland? Yes. What a brave man, what a great American, what a great warrior. Get to know Jim Simpson, his policies. We're not endorsing because we can't, but we certainly can ask you to look at the policies. Look at Jim Simpson's work, his policies, compare that to the incumbent, who obviously in Maryland would be a Democrat. In Florida, we've got 2 remarkable candidates running. Laura Loomer, there's only one Laura Loomer. She understands Sharia. She talks about it all the time. She's been banned. She's been to Michigan. She's confronted Sharia candidates. Again, get to know Laura Loomer and her policies and consider what you can do to help her, whether you live in Florida or not. Another Florida person running for office is Mike Velarde. Mike Velarde is a very interesting law enforcement. He's put people in jail for fraud. for all kinds of fraud. Again, an interesting character. We're pointing these people out. We invite you to let us know at Sharia Crime Stoppers whatever, Mary, Spearpoint 911 at ShariaCrimeStoppers.org. If you've got a candidate, we should start talking about or naming. Again, these are brave people. They're taking the action, and we need to be aware of their work and where we can support them. We've got to get the evangelicals out to register and vote. We found vote.gov, which is a national site where you can register online anywhere from any place there is. Keep in mind, primaries are starting soon, and you need to be registered even to deal with primaries. We're inviting you to think strategically, including looking at states like Florida, where we need your help. Trump cannot win without Florida. Bottom line, we provide a lot of resources in terms of Sharia Crime Stoppers, the webinars, the podcast, unitedwest.org. Take advantage, get more people involved, and of course, keep us going with your thoughtful donations. Mary, do you want to give us a final comment, and we'll close it out?
Yeah, Philip was just fantastic tonight, and all of these webinars that we provide free, we would like to let everybody know that we, like I've said before, freedom is not free. All of these webinars cost us money, cost the United West money. All of these folks that we bring to you, they're struggling as well. We realize that there are numerous people asking for donations these days, especially candidates that need your support. But the United West is a 501c3 and has taken Sharia Crime Stoppers under the wing and allowed us to become an affiliate. So we hope that you'll consider a donation to help us stay strong and bringing you all the resources that we can possibly bring you, from the website to the webinars to speaking engagements. It's the only way we're going to be able to fight this threat that we have against Constitution and America. So we like to make sure that everybody thinks about what is going to be like without Trump as president. And this is our message to how we can do that. So we appreciate any donations you can provide.
Thank you, Mary, and everyone listening. Next Monday night, we have Christine Douglas Williams, and on Tuesday night, Curtis Bowers. With that, we'll say good night, and thank you for your patience and your listening and what you do every day to win the fight. Good night.